All right, so in this video, we're going to start our long road to the French Revolution. And basically, what we're going to do here is kind of set the stage for some of the 18th century conflicts, which will set the stage for the French Revolution. So, the seeds of the French Revolution are going to start pretty much at the very beginning of the 1700s. So nothing that we talk about here is directly related to the French Revolution, but this has got to set the stage for it. So really, these 18th century conflicts, 18th century, hinge on three deaths. So there are three people that are about to die, and these three people kind of usher in the instability that's going to cause the conflicts. So these three people, in no particular order: Queen Anne of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom; Frederick William I, King of Prussia. He's the one that's going to give us Frederick the Great. And like I said in a previous video, all of them are named Frederick or William or Frederick William, and Frederick the Great's dad is Frederick William I, King of Prussia. The third death is going to be somebody that we haven't talked about, and this is Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor. And, coincidentally, the father of a bunch of daughters. And it's that fact that's going to spark a lot of the wars. So we're going to do these in order. So the first one we're going to tackle is the death of Queen Anne. So let's do the British side of this story. And so if we're thinking about the British story here, this is the rise of the British. That's what we're talking about here. So, unlike a lot of their rivals, the British never really seemed all that interested in protecting their dynastic line. So if we go all the way back to like Elizabeth died, which gave us a new branch of the English monarchy, the Stuarts, who were from Scotland. And then when the Stuarts are wiped out, we're going to get a new line. And we get three new dynastic lines in 150 years, which is crazy considering that like the French line has gone back for like 800 years. The same thing could be said about the Russians or the Prussians. So there are three dynasties: the Tudors, the Stuarts, and now the House of Hanover, or Hanoverians, in 150 years. So when Queen Anne dies, who was the youngest daughter of James II, so William and Mary were the monarchs after James in the Glorious Revolution. Anne was Mary's younger sister, and she became queen after William and Mary died. And then when she dies, she didn't have any children. So the king is then given to the throne is given to distant German cousins. From a little Germany called Hanover. Now, what ends up happening here is that because there is so much turnover in the dynastic line, and they need to consider the wants and needs of the merchants and Parliament. What ends up happening in Great Britain is that they turn their navy into the most powerful military force on the planet. Most of this is designed to protect their trade routes and their far-flung colonies in places like North America and India. So they start funneling all of this money into their navy instead of maybe funneling it into protecting their dynastic line through war, like we might see in France or Prussia or Russia. So what the British are doing is focusing all of their attention on their navy to protect their colonies and their trade routes. They also use their navy to augment their joint stock company, the British East India Company. So the fact that they're not really defending their dynastic line and protecting it like the other Europeans do, and they're funneling all their money into their navy, makes them super rich. These guys are now really, really rich. Another thing that leads to the British kind of becoming the dominant economic power in Europe has to do with their new king. So their new king George the First is German. Like, he's from Germany. And he doesn't speak English. Well, he does speak English, but it's like his fourth or fifth language, and he's not good enough at English to run the government. So he doesn't speak English well enough to run the government. He speaks English, he's conversational, but he doesn't know it well enough to run the government. So what he does is he entrusts the day-to-day governance to his chief minister, Robert Walpole. And Walpole is kind of considered to be the first real prime minister. Or at least the first modern prime minister. And what his job is to make government predictable for the rich merchants. And despite whatever you might think about whether that's right or wrong, whether government should be like designed to benefit the rich merchants or not, the point is that government is predictable. Government is now predictable. It may be designed to benefit rich merchants. That's not the point. The point is that government, for the first time, is predictable. It's stable. And this stability in government also makes the British really rich, because investors want safe, stable places to put their money. And the British have basically designed their entire government to do this, to give people a safe and stable place to put their money. And so they get even more wealthy. And so by like the 1730s, the British are way ahead of everyone else. And they're all playing catch up. So two things lead to the British kind of becoming the predominant economic power. Instead of fighting to keep their dynastic control of the throne and putting a bunch of money into that, they kind of give up on that and instead put their money into their navy. That defends their trade routes, it defends their colonies, and it helps their joint stock company, and that makes them a lot of money. The fact that their new king doesn't really speak English well enough to run the government, and he entrusts the day-to-day governance to this guy, Walpole, who makes government predictable with political parties, also makes things really stable. And so by the time we get to like the middle of the 18th century, the British are way ahead of everybody else. Okay, so the next set of deaths are going to happen at the same time. So we're now going to turn our attention to Charles VI. So Charles VI was the Holy Roman Emperor. And he had a bunch of daughters. And around 1713, he realizes that he's probably not going to have a male heir. So he goes around to all the important little Germanys and other powers in Europe, and he gets them to acknowledge his daughter, Maria Theresa, as his heir. And most of them, they all agree. They all agree to do this. And this is known as the Pragmatic Sanction, or the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, because there's a lot of pragmatic sanctions. So the two deaths that happen within months of each other happen in 1740. So in 1740, Charles VI dies. And Frederick William I dies, who then, his death gives us Frederick the Great. So, the way Charles had it set up is that Maria Theresa would then become his heir, not the Holy Roman Emperor, but Maria Theresa would inherit all the Austrian land, and her husband would become Holy Roman Emperor. That was the plan. But Frederick the Great didn't want to follow that plan. So almost immediately, Frederick invades Austrian-held Silesia. So Silesia was a province of Austria, and Frederick wants it. Silesia is heavily populated and economically prosperous. And Frederick wants it. This sparks what's called the War of Austrian Succession. The War of Austrian Succession. And what we get is a pretty traditional war fought along traditional lines. So we've got the Austrian side, and we've got the Prussian side. So France sides with Prussia. So France is on this side of the war because they hate the Austrians. They hate the Austrian Habsburgs. They've hated them for a long time. They just hate them, and they're going to side with the Prussians. The United Kingdom goes with Austria because they don't like the French, who are their rivals in North America. The Spanish join with the Prussians because they've been fighting the British in North America. The Dutch join the Austrians because they are allies with the British. The Russians pretty much stay out of this war, but they pretty much join up over here with the Austrians because the Prussians launched a coup against the Russians. And then there are some smaller countries that join up on either side, like Hanover joins the Austrians because of the British. The Bavarians join the Prussians because they don't like the Habsburgs either. And then you might throw like the Swedes. The Swedish get involved because they don't like the Russians. These are pretty traditional lines. So you've got Prussia, France, Spain, Bavaria, and Sweden versus Austria, Great Britain, the Netherlands, the Russians, and the Hanoverians. It's a pretty basic standard war. The war is itself not all that interesting. So just continue down here. So here are the two sides. The war itself, not that interesting. Here are the results. Prussia keeps Silesia. Maria Theresa gets to keep all the stuff she inherited. The British keep their monopoly on the slave trade into Spanish North America. And the word for this is the Ascensio. And just to be clear, this is a pretty common mercantilist tactic to force trade with your rivals. So this is a pretty common mercantilist tactic. The other big result of the War of Austrian Succession is this. So the war goes from 1740 to 1748. The other big result, and this is where we'll start the next video, the other big result is that no one was happy with their allies. They all felt like their allies were the ones that lost the war. No one was happy with their allies, so we're going to all switch partners for the next war. Which is where we will start our next video. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.